Aparna, amazing to have you here on our show. So this initiative from KelpHR on International Women's Day is to speak to some amazing women like you. Aparna Popat here, folks, for people who are watching for the first time, is an Arjuna Awardee and ace badminton player. She's a mother and she has done it all. Welcome aboard, Aparna.
Thank you so much. Really happy to be here.
Thank you. So, Aparna, let's get started with your journey. I mean, a sportswoman back in 1980s when you were trying to fidget around maybe with your badminton, was it really an easy journey? Did you ever think that this will happen to you?
See, so when I started off, badminton wasn't on the anvil at all. So there was no question of a journey or anything of the sort. As a child, I was very, very playful. And I would pick up any sport or, any physical activity. And I used to really enjoy myself, be it from cricket to be playing chore police or, to playing seven stones or whatever it may be. So it wasn't really about sport or structured sport or coaching. And that time, that's how it was. So basically, when I look back at my journey, it was, very predictably unpredictable. I come from a traditional Gujarati family. With no background in sport whatsoever. So when I picked up sport, it was more just to keep me occupied and keep me out of the house, because otherwise I would make a racket in the house and be, full of energy and trouble everyone. Sport was basically that for me. And I really started enjoying it so much. Now, I went to a school that preferred encouraging arts over sport. So there was hardly any support from school either, in that sense. Then you look at my physical build, I wasn't physically very strong. Well, that also, it just happened and it didn't matter really now when I look back. And fourthly, I think as a person, I was very shy and introverted and I think not competitive really by nature. So if I look at these sort of environment like this, it was very hard to figure that, I would eventually manage, win the number of national titles, like 16 titles in 17 years, or, get a medal at the World Junior Championships, or, 4 medals at the Commonwealth Games, or, even play 2 Olympics. So, and the Arjuna Award that you mentioned. So it was just a journey that happened one step at a time. But it was more because I think I love the sport so much. And that's just the kind of, sort of attitude I carried on with. And that's why everything happened.
You just mentioned, Aparna, that you were a Gujarati girl, but I remember my old days when my friends from Gujarati background, they were given a diktat that you have to be a CA or a CS. So was that also with you?
See, it's about numbers, right? Yeah. So the numbers that I looked at was the score in matches. It's okay. I think because when you're so young, you don't really face the brunt of it. But I'm sure my family did. And I think they sort of would have to face comments or, the looks that you get from family, when you're venturing into such a career. And I remember a lot of people telling my mom, saying, why do you keep taking her to the club every evening? What is she going to achieve? You'd rather sit and make a study or put her in tuitions or, something of the sort. And you're wasting your time. You're not, giving enough attention at home. Make sure, the kitchen work is done and, things like that. So it was, I think, more for mom and dad to adjust and rather than me. And I think they really took it up really well and supported me right throughout.
So you saying your mom and dad were with you throughout. They didn't force you to, now it's time for you to get married. Now it's time for you to pay attention to your family. So you never faced that brunt. Are you saying that, Aparna?
I played a lot and as I said, it was one step after the other, right? And there was always something to look forward to, especially towards the end. It was in 2000 where I played the Olympics, and then 2004, again, I played the Olympics. So till then, there was no real discussion, on that front. But all I'll say, see, it's about priorities, right? Sometimes your own priorities, sometimes the family's priorities, and it's about finding that balance. And then once you take a decision, it's about seeing it through and then being okay with it. Yeah, of course, there were pressures at certain times, when there were issues at home. And I used to stay away from home. So at that point, you felt like just leave everything. You've played enough. Just go home and be with family. My grandmother was very ill. Towards the end of my career, she was critically ill, and I think that was the time where I just dropped everything and I moved back to Mumbai because I was in Bangalore training and I was extremely close to her, and it was literally an overnight decision. I said, it's now, I have to go. So yeah, I mean, you take those decisions, but you take them keeping a lot of things in mind, and the main thing is that then you have to be okay with it. You can't take a decision, feel guilty, and then you know then it's not a good feeling.
Guilt must be seeping in, that I'm so good, I'm extremely good, but look what I'm doing, I'm taking a step back.
I think it's about taking the decision, keeping everything in mind. Sometimes you have to be in the background and put somebody else in front, and then that's absolutely fine. There's absolutely no problem with that, because you have to realize that a lot of the times you've been in the forefront, right? And other people have been okay with it. And especially like when it comes to family, my mother used to work, and she quit work just because she had to travel with me when I was in school and much younger, and we used to go for tournaments. And when you see other people in your family making sacrifices like that, my sister, I can say, in a lot of ways grew up on her own because mom used to travel with me. So it was only her and dad at home, and not once did she complain. So when other people have done it, there's no problem. You always have that responsibility that you have to do it back for them, and did it happily.
Even maybe you must be so young at that time. Still, you had that balance, saying that, okay, I have made a decision. I have seen that people have sacrificed for me, and now I have been on the forefront. These are your words, and I've been the limelight. I've been in the spotlight. Now it is somebody else's turn to do. So I will give them that importance. So, sorry about bringing this back again, but one thing that I want to understand. I have two boys and they play football, extremely talented, okay? But, there is a lot of effort for any parent to keep taking them to trainings almost on daily basis. And you said your mother had to quit her job to be with the child. Do you think it's right to do that? Or how do you strike that balance, right? I mean, I can't imagine quitting my job. I don't think my husband will quit his job. Uh, and who will face the brunt is maybe my child, who might not get a training. But how do you really make that adjustment, or what should you be focusing on?
See, everybody really works within their situations. Correct. I mean, each person's situation at home is different. And in my case, we lived in a joint family. So my mom, could afford to leave the house, to my dad and my sister because there were other people at home. Which also in a way made it harder because then mom had more responsibilities at home. So she had to work that much harder in the house because there were more people to take care of. So it's both ways, like it's a double-edged sword. And speaking of taking kids, or investing, quitting jobs, see, these are very, very big decisions to be taken, and it depends on your situation. And if you can, and if you feel there's potential, then do it. If you feel there's not, then empower and make sure your kid is independent enough to do it on their own. But the involvement of the parent with the child in whatever they do, I mean, we're talking about sports here, but it could be any extracurricular that they want to pursue, has got to be there to some extent. You can't leave them just on their own. So make sure at least at matches you're there, make sure weekends you're there, make sure if there's anything special, ask if they need anything before, after, whatever it may be. Do whatever you can, because I have a daughter and she's young, but somewhere I think kids sense that if you're really putting in effort and you care for them, they'll be okay with it, even if you feel you're putting in maybe a minimum like a 20-25%, but they will see it much more than that if they see that you are putting in your best effort. So
I think this is something that every mother who is watching would want to hear, because they are constantly toggling between their full-time jobs, their kids, their home, and how do you really manage this, Aparna? Thank you. Coming from horse's mouth is amazing, right? So my next question to you, Aparna, is about ecosystem at sports centers, or in for women specifically. How do you think, was it encouraging? Was it discouraging? Because I've heard stories about not having changing rooms, you being traveling for days together without having proper washroom facilities, and being put up in bunk beds, which is not clean, and girls being girls are very particular about cleanliness. How was the ecosystem all about?
Yeah, so it was challenging for sure, and I think you mentioned a few things in terms of the practical issues, like the changing rooms, like travel sometimes gets difficult. So yeah, there were these things, but sometimes you feel that this is gender independent, because not having good facilities or not having hygienic facilities is on both sides, right? But speaking of girls in particular, let me give you a couple of instances. I think one, when we used to travel for international events, the bigger events as well, when the team kit came, it would be all men's sizes. So we would somewhere land up playing in oversized t-shirts and shorts, because there was nobody bothered, right, to give a women's sort of sizing kit. So just small things like this, and of course travel. I remember once going to Bareilly for a tournament when we were very young. I think maybe I was like about 15 or so. And the train, we were at Bareilly railway station, and the train was to come at 2 o'clock at night. And just as the train approached the platform, the lights went off. Now in that situation, at that time there were no mobile phones, so you didn't have torches or anything that you could look back. We didn't know which bogie, we didn't know where we were getting on, and we had to get on that train. Now being a girl, in a situation like that, it was really really hard, and you're stuck, right? At times you don't know what to do. So yeah, so things like this get challenging. And there's also other sort of issues where generally people feel that women's sport is not as attractive as men's sport. Girls don't play as well. I mean, because of course the physicality is different. So where you see the men diving about and smashing and jumping and smashing, and girls don't do that. So on in a generic sort of manner. But so that is a problem. And then of course there's opportunities. So when team selections used to happen, 4 boys would be selected and only 1 girl. And you look at practice timings, there would be more practice time given to the boys, the new shuttles given to the boys, and then we would get everything that's left over. So a lot of things like that, visibility in the media would be an issue. So yeah, there were challenges, and this is at a time when I was playing. Of course things have improved tremendously since then. But yes, sport makes you tough, and you have to be tough. As you mentioned, girls are finicky about these things. You can't afford to be finicky, because these things are going to happen. And keep the fact that you're here to perform, as your number one goal, and everything else just adjust and adapt.
Sports makes you tough, and you have to be tough, right? You cannot get finicky. It's not a man or a woman. It is gender agnostic, and you have to ensure that that situation needs you to be tough. The Bareilly train coming in and the light going off, only thing that you can do is get into it. We'll figure out later. That's awesome, Aparna. But now, one thing, did you ever doubt yourself? Am I good enough? Because every situation, everything, we keep doubting, especially with women. The studies also show that, right? That if there are CEO positions, all men will raise their hand, but only 1 or 2 women will raise their hand, because they constantly doubt themselves whether they're up for it, can they do it. So did you ever doubt your capability? And if you doubt it, then what did you do to overcome it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's no question about, not doubting yourself. It happened many a times. There were those days. But the difference is that I couldn't show it. One was because I was an introvert, so I would not speak about it. And the second is because I was winning. And that, sort of puts a lot of pressure on you. And you don't want opponents to sort of see you vulnerable, so you have to put up this brave front, even though from inside you are severely doubting yourself. And And over the years, I think what I realized is that when things like this happen, I would work harder. There was no room for excuses, and there was no room for self pity at all. And this was because I think I always believed, and I still believe, whatever you do, you yourself need to be accountable for. And when that happens, you start looking for solutions. Sometimes with the help of others, sometimes on your own, but you have to find those solutions. It doesn't matter how you're feeling, but you need to learn to get over the situation and then be accountable. And whatever happens, win or lose, it's on you. And that is something that I always believe. So yeah, there was no room for excuses. After you lost the match, what use is an excuse, right?
So, Aparna, if I have to ask you, did you face any discrimination while you told about the t-shirt size? But are there any other discrimination that you faced while on field or off field?
See, I think when through your career, generally feel that the discrimination comes from men who are also in the field, right? Now, if I look at from where I started off, speaking of my father, first of all, being my rock and my support system and my go-to person, very silent, hardly used to talk, but made sure that I had everything I needed. No matter what was going on in the background, my dad has stood with me rock solid through everything. All my coaches were men, starting with Mr. Anil Pradhan to Mr. Prakash Padukone and Vimal Kumar, and then Mr. Ganguly Prasad. So, and I think all these people now, when I look back now, I think what really stood out was they were very respectful to women. They were protective, they were non-judgmental, and they were very ambitious for me. And I think that sort of made a huge difference. So as far as my closest circle was concerned, I would say no, there was no discrimination. But yes, if you take a step back and look at the larger ecosystem, as I mentioned earlier, there were a lot of challenges and a lot of perceptions that needed to be changed. But I love this quote, I think, by Muhammad Ali, where he says, it isn't the mountains ahead to climb that wear you down, but it's that pebble in your shoe. So sometimes it's the very small things that actually trip you up and sort of then add up to become a burden or a stereotype in that sense. But as far as I'm concerned, as I said, my closest system was extremely supportive, so no reason to complain.
You already mentioned that, named some people, some men who are very, very supportive, starting from your dad. Were there any other people whom you owe this to, other than the people whom you, or these people, if there are any stories around them to share, any learnings from each one of them that you would want to share?
A lot of what I did, and the credit goes to them, because see, it's very easy to train for yourself. It's very easy to work hard when you know you're going to get the medal, or you're going to get the reward, or you're going to get the fame or the money or whatever. But it's very hard to work for someone else. And that is the kind of appreciation that I have towards everyone I just mentioned. So it was my family who played a huge role. So very grateful to them. And what I've really learned is that, when you work in a team, then things become possible, because no champion is made alone. The effort is yours, the attitude is yours, but unless you have the right mentors and the right coaches and the right support system and support staff around you, it becomes very, very difficult. And as you said, if there were other people, I think there were tons of other people, right? From the housekeeping staff at the badminton courts, right up to, people in the federation, or, friends around, who kept me sane through my mad journey in sport. So I've learned something from each one of them. And, I'm extremely, extremely grateful. And especially in this COVID scenario, when we saw the sport of badminton that was severely affected, and in fact did a fundraiser for coaches and management staff, housekeeping staff, markers in badminton. And it was very gratifying, because it was just my way of saying thank you and appreciating them for everything that they have done. If I say this, right, if there was no one to clean the court, I would have slipped and fallen and got injured. If there were no umpires and referees, who would, host our tournaments for us? What would I have played? If there were no coaches, then, there wouldn't be that many players. I wouldn't have opponents to play with. So if you look at it in that sense, I think I have many, many people to thank for what I've achieved and where I am today.
It's like, yes, thank you very much to every person who must have given a teeny weeny support to your journey, to, of course, the largest support they would have given you. So, Aparna, somewhere you would have felt that something could have been done differently, then I would have reached some other level.
I think maybe back then, and it was a different sort of system, right? I think women were more accepting of things that were going on around. We didn't really stand up and challenge. We just said, this is the way it is. We'll try and make it marginally better, but it's a slow process, and we're not going to aggressively go after the change. So I feel, yeah, in that sense, maybe if I was a little more aggressive and a little more demanding for what I really wanted in order to make me better, I would ask, but ask politely. I think, and if you're in a position to demand because you're the number one player in the country and you have the international medals, and if I was a bit more demanding, maybe I would have got a little more. And if I'd got a little more facilities, then maybe things could have been different. But these are just ifs and buts, you never know. This is just thinking back.
Once, Aparna, what you said is so important. And if I reflect back to my journey also, it, I think we were brought up like that. Be polite, do not argue, do not back answer, and in that, we still continue with those values, right? There are times when people just walk away and we're just watching at them because we don't want to demand for it, right? So well said. And those were the values. Some of us still live by those values, right? So do you think, Aparna, is it important to have a great infrastructure? While we know of a lot of people who did not have great infrastructure doing extremely well in sports, right? We have loads of examples if we have to go. Some are born stars, right? And some are given those things also may not be successful in sports. Do you think great infrastructure is important, or it helps a sports person in any way?
It's hard to imagine a sports person coming up without infrastructure, but it's harder imagining a sports person coming up without a good coach or a good trainer. So if I were to look at both these, and I feel both these are really required, I would put people in front of infrastructure and give them more priority, because you can somewhere compromise slightly as long as the infrastructure, I feel, is safe and it is adequate in terms of what is required of the sport. That should be enough. The size of the infrastructure really doesn't matter. How fancy it is really doesn't matter. The practicality of it is more important. But a coach or your trainer or your mentor, I think these are the people that really, really make the difference. So
I never thought about that. I mean, of course, you've been a sports person and you know it well. So, according to you, the coaches, the people who train you, the people who put efforts in your success is much more important than infrastructure, right?
Was interestingly reading somewhere that the more comfortable you make the infrastructure, there's less likeliness of the kid being tougher and being more driven, because they get comfortable, and being comfortable is never the right environment for a sports person to come up in. So it's got to be neat, hygienic, practical, safe, but it doesn't really need to have the frills.
That's really awesome, because there are times when me as a mother, I feel very sick in my stomach when I see my son, his coach pushing him for things, right? And I'm like, why do you have to do that? But you kind of bursting with saying no, let them be, let them do, they'll become more tougher. So have you ever yourself been pulled down by your own biases?
When I played in that era that I played in, the Chinese were very, very dominant. And I always felt that the Chinese were superior in every facet of the game. I think it was true. I still believe it was true because they were very, very good. It pulled you down because you were polite and you were accepting, and then you were saying, okay, this is how it is. And though somewhere in your mind you knew that if you probably had more and you pushed for more, you could prepare better. And if you prepare better, then, I mean, once you're on court, at least there's some semblance of evenness, or your belief changes. See, when you prepare better, you have a stronger belief going into a match or a tournament. And yeah, so I think that bias of the Chinese being better, and then consequently me not doing anything about it aggressively, a combination of that, yeah, probably pulled me down a bit, if I may say that.
Did you ever challenge any discrimination that was happening against you? Or as you've said that I was so polite that I would just take it.
First of all, I think from when I was very young, my coach had, put in my head, or rather, stuffed in my head and said, you will not talk, you let your racket do the talking. I tried to challenge discrimination with my performances, by which, it was very easy for the selectors to not select a female member, like a women's singles sort of slot on the team, and only send men, because that used to happen in the past, in the generation before mine, or generations before mine. And so what I did was really try to win nationals, and I won it 9 times in a row, consecutively equaling, Padma Shri Prakash Padukone's record. So tried to do that, became the first Indian to win a medal at the World Junior Championships. So you tried to sort of challenge discrimination with performance, so that you couldn't be, put on the side. Basically, you were very much in the forefront. But I also come from a school where they were very encouraging to have an opinion, to have a voice. So there were always things in my head where I felt it was wrong. But I think once I was more senior and more established, I did put my point of view forth, maybe whether it's through the press or, you know,
Good. At least you raised it. You've given a voice to the coming generation, and further they will take it, I guess. Okay, and I hope they do, right? And people who are listening to you will also do that. So, Aparna, moving to few of our last questions, and very important. Any key messages to the upcoming girls in the sports, or women in the sports, that you would want them to remember, you want them to take with them, you want them to hold it by their chest? Any input from you?
yeah, I think first is that sport belongs to everyone. Just to remember that whether you're a boy or a girl, it doesn't matter, because, the sports ground or the court or your sporting equipment knows no gender. The funda remains the same. You have to work hard and you have to enjoy, whatever you want to do. There's a great joy in competing against the boys, and being on the same team as them also. So I think that's a different experience, and it's essential. But to say that, look, don't expect to be treated specially, and don't expect to be treated fairly all the time. It's not going to happen. Nobody gets treated, specially or fair all the time. But you have to be resilient, you have to be determined, you have to be tough. I love this quote where it says that your wings already exist, all you have to do is learn to fly. So sky is the limit. Yeah, just go out and play. That's it. It doesn't matter, boy or girl.
One final question. Any comments, any suggestions to the policymakers in our country around how could we encourage women in sports, or sports generally? Because other than few handpicked sports, not many of them are given that much importance. Yeah, lately we have seen a little bit of importance to other sports, including badminton, but still there are so many sports which are not given due importance. So any suggestions, any thoughts for them?
Over the years, of course, there have been many efforts and initiatives, through policy and otherwise, to actually push women and girls in sport, and push sport in general into our ecosystem. India is still trying to develop a sporting culture, so there's a lot to do, right from our Prime Minister's initiative of the Fit India movement to the Khelo India Games, and the government's doing their bit as well. But I feel our country is very, very big and very diverse. And, many small individual efforts are happening, they cannot be as effective as one single legislation or one single policy change. So the policy change basically has to happen right at the top. and it has to be implemented very strictly. It's not enough to just have a policy and then nobody is there to implement it and take action if it's not, put into place. So just to give you an example, when I went to the US in 2012 for the Global Sports Mentoring Program, which was an initiative of Hillary Clinton and the US Department of State, along with ESPNW, where it was a program where to promote women and girls in sport, and where they did mention to us about Title IX, which is a legislation that the US came up with in 1972. And it was basically where girls should be given equal opportunity across the board in all the fields, which include sport, in federally funded colleges and schools. And if this wasn't given, then the support from the government would be withdrawn. So it was to that extent. And what really resulted is that today they've seen that school sport has seen participation from girls which has grown 1000%, and college sport by 600%, just because of this one legislation. So yeah, I think policy change has to be done. Women have to be better represented on committees, and given decision making power, and let them participate in more governance roles and in places where these policies are being made and implemented. So yeah, very rightly said, I think policy is going to have the biggest change if and when it happens.
1000% growth. Some number people should be watching. I guess Mr. Modi is listening to us. Okay, and one last question, sorry about that, is about did in your time girls feel safe in the infrastructure that was provided to them? Or there was this constant worry that I have to take care of myself?
I think, whether it is safe or not, I think it's just healthy to have this attitude to say, I have to take care of myself. Because, things change and things change very rapidly. We've heard stories that are not so nice, in sport and otherwise as well. But at the end of the day, I think educating them, giving them a forum, that in case, and giving them the comfort that if they feel uncomfortable with something, that they have someone to come and talk to, and then that someone will take them seriously and do something about it. So yes, that is required. And there are, of course, many safe places to play sport, but at the same time this has to be done. There's no compromises on this aspect as well.
That is awesome, Aparna. And thank you very much. I think we've learned so much from you today. We picked your brains to understand how we can make sports an integral part of every woman's life, every girl's life. I'm sure many of them must be listening. I personally know few of the girls who are extremely good in their sport, in their own sport, but they will be happy to hear from you about today's discussion and what you gave as an input. Thank you very, very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on this.